ATACMS. It's finally happened. After all the rumors, after all the back and the forth and the back and the forth, Ukraine has finally gotten ATACMS, and they've introduced them to the world with a bang. Now, we knew that something around ATACMS could be coming. There were some rumors a few months ago that the Biden administration was going to approve it. Then the Biden administration came out and said, nah, we're not approving it. Then a few weeks later, another report came out that actually they were going to approve it and they were going to send a small amount of ATACMS over to Ukraine. But it was still all foggy. The fog of war was still heavy. We didn't know exactly when they were going to be sent, if for sure they were going to be sent, or how they were going to be used. But apparently, from what I've read, this was the point. They wanted the ATACMS to arrive in Ukraine for the Russians not to be ready for it. So then when they have that 300-kilometer range extender that goes much further than the other long-range missiles that they have at their disposal, including the Storm Shadow, it does go slightly farther than the Storm Shadow, then they could take advantage of it to possibly bomb a Russian airfield that the Russians would not have time to clear out once they've heard the report that they've gotten ATACMS. And a few weeks before this happened, I was seeing some reports that American officials wanted it to be on the lowdown for this exact reason. And that seems to have been the case, because they've introduced it with a bang by firing ATACMS missiles at a Russian airbase and in Luhansk. I think we got two locations that were taken out. Here is the footage of them being launched, and then I can show you guys some of the damage. Man. History, huh? So here is the damage that was done. We've gotten some high-profile satellite imagery of the aftermath of the explosion. Let's read a little bit of the post here. In accordance with the already known spacing of Russian aviation assets at this base, even bigger black plumes were seen here can be counted as destroyed Russian military helicopters. We know that when the ATACMS hit, they caught fire, which was sustained, and their ammo was cooking off. In total, Russia appears to have lost 6 to 8 helicopters. I heard an earlier report saying 9, but still, 6 to 8 is a lot. Let's assume those two seen on the lower horizontal runway might be repairable, as their burn marks don't seem to be as extensive as the ones elsewhere, although I may be wrong. The Ukrainian military desired to struck the corner where the helicopters were parked most tightly, and rightly so, and it seems that they have succeeded. You can see the smoke plumes where the helicopters are. You can see all this aviation spread out across the base. 6 to 8 helicopters destroyed. I also heard reports that air defense were destroyed in these strikes as well, and an ammo depot was also destroyed. Now, I saw some copium. Most of the copium, I think it was Armchair Warlord, who is a Western commentator about the war, who's trying to say, oh, it's only 2 that were destroyed, not anymore. Well, obviously, these photographs and the other reports we're getting disprove that. We can see Russian air defenses trying to work and failing. But does anybody actually have the post? Does anybody have the Armchair Cope Lord post? I would like to read it quickly before we continued. It was very funny, but I think I'm blocked. And so I don't know if I can show it. So if anybody could pull it up quickly and maybe leave a link to it either in site chat or in gutter chat, I would greatly appreciate it. But something that was interesting about this specific ATACMS strike, it isn't just that it took out like 8 helicopters and air defense and ammo depots, and was really humiliating for the Russian Air Force and could be one of the, if not the most destructive days in the Russian Air Force's modern history. But they also did it with some pretty old American munitions that have been off the production line for more than 20 years, using technically expired US munitions to take out those helicopters. Here's the variant that they used. Here's the original picture that was posted by the way, if you want more reliable OSCENT pages, here's one of the more reliable ones right here. They're using the M39 block ATACMS. The manufacturing date is from 1996, and it came off the production line in 1997. This is a 27-year-old missile being used to take out 8 Russian helicopters, air defense, and ammo depots. Technically expired. There are so many more modern systems that could have been used, but systems developed by not even developed by the United States, systems that went off the production line 27 years ago are still able to penetrate Russian air defense and disable quite a lot of helicopters. You know, I know that there's been a lot of concentration on the fact that the Americans have a technology advantage on the Russians. That we have a lot more high-tech Air Force, high-tech Navy, high-tech, a lot more just money invested into developing more modern weapon systems. But a lot of times, simple is better. A lot of times, more simple is better. And this also shows that once you give Ukraine the tools necessary to do the job, the tools don't need to be pretty. The tools don't need to necessarily have all the bells and whistles. The tools just need to be able to get the job done, and they will do everything within their power to get the job done. One second. Here's the post from Armchair Copelord. Turns out ATACMS was a bust, as expected. This morning, the Ukrainians launched a major strike on Berdyansk airfield, a major base for Russian army aviation, with their new ATACMS missile and long-range guided bombs. The results were unimpressive. The airfield was hit somewhere between 1 and 4 times, with 2 helicopters destroyed and several damaged by shrapnel. Again, we know that to not be true. We have the satellite photographs to prove it. He is the only one saying this. If flight operations were suspended at all, it was likely for less than 30 minutes, and most of the damaged aircraft has probably been repaired or returned to operations by now. I like that, by the way. It's all been repaired. If it was damaged, it was fixed, or it wasn't damaged at all. The Russians subsequently reported shooting down 5 ATACMS missiles and 4 GLSDBs, with the wreckage of at least 1 downed missile appearing online in the aftermath. I remind the audience that this is precisely what ATACMS was designed to do: destroy large soft targets in the Soviet rear beyond the range of conventional artillery and rocket systems. It appeared to have managed a 20 to 40% penetration rate and a mass salvo against air defense that had never engaged this kind of bandit before. With the surviving missile delivering an ineffective strike, this penetration rate is going to drop to 0 to 10% rapidly of Russian air defense performance thus far is any indication. This is unsurprising. ATACMS is a first-generation quasi-ballistic missile, and as such, has some compromise regarding speed and altitude that I suspect make it rather vulnerable to missile defenses. The Ukrainians tried to follow up this strike with attacks against the southern front without significant success. Rybar reported some Marines managed to get over Dnipro across to Kherson City and establish a small bridgehead. I have something here about that. One second. We'll read about it later. But no other outlet that does independent reporting has confirmed it, and Rybar has published bad reports of Ukrainian advances lately. I suspect bad news helps their revenue from doom scrollers. So, number one, his take is that only 2 helicopters were destroyed. He doesn't know that. And now we have satellite photos that are saying the exact opposite of that were published the day after. But, of course, Armchair Warlord had to jump out in front of all the information before it was released to come to a conclusive discovery of, it'll go down to 0 to 10% effectiveness if things continue like this. And just 24 hours later, everything he was saying disproved. But the best part of this, in my opinion, is at the end, he says that Rybar, a Russian-aligned map maker, right? For those of you who don't know, Rybar are the people who make maps for the more pro-Russian side. Maybe we can bring it up here for a second. This is the type of maps, you've probably seen them before. They made them earlier in the war, and they had some of the most devastating conclusions for the Ukrainian war effort earlier on in the war. A lot of their maps have some inaccuracies, but it is interesting to use it as a source for what the Russians confirm has been lost and has not been lost. But he is saying that Rybar is overestimating the Ukrainians in order to make more money from Russians who are scared by the Ukrainians. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. When even his colleagues are saying the situation isn't as good as he would like it to be, instead of accepting that, hey, the independent media is saying the situation isn't as good as they suspect it to be. Ukrainians are saying it. The Western officials are saying it. And even some of my colleagues on the more pro-Russia side are saying it. Instead of accepting that and having to have that mesh with his pre-existing conclusions, he just disregards it and say it's motivated by finance. This is someone who's already come to his conclusion, and so he's trying to walk back from his conclusion. So, what does this mean? Well, I wanna conclude this with one last set of posts. 1 second. One last set of bullet points that really interested me. Is this the one? I don't think this is the one. Maybe it's the one. Nope, it is not the one. I wanted to show you guys all of the different things that we were told that we could not send to the Ukrainians for escalatory reasons. I wanted to read through some of them. I don't know if we have them all here, but I gotta find them. I could have sworn that I saved it in this page I have here. Nope. On, it has to be here somewhere. Nope. Annabelle's gonna have to edit this out. Poor man, poor man. Here it is. Now that ATACMS has been delivered and nuclear war is inevitable, that's what we were told. Let's go through some of the red lines Russia has drawn so far. December of 2021, no weapons from the West to Ukraine. February 2022, no Western interference in Ukraine. March of 2022, no more Western weapons to Ukraine. March of 2022, no MiGs to Ukraine. June of 2022, no long-range missiles to Ukraine. August of 2022, no supplying of old Soviet tanks to Ukraine. September 2022, aid by Germany crossed the red line. September of 2022, no longer range missiles than HIMARS to Ukraine. November of 2022, no Patriot systems to Ukraine. January of 2023, no modern Western tanks to Ukraine. May of 2023, no F-16s to Ukraine. In September of 2023, no ATACMS to Ukraine. With the warning from Russia being around long-range missiles like the ATACMS saying, if the U.S. sends longer-range missiles, then it would become a, and I quote, party to the conflict. Well, we send the missiles, they just used it, it disabled 6 to 8 Russian helicopters, took out an ammo dump, disabled some air defense. Now what? Now what? It's been like 24, 48 hours since the ATACMS strike. If we're a party to the conflict, then the Russian missiles should be flying at us at any moment now. Well, not at me. I'm already in Ukraine. They're always throwing missiles this way. But where's the strikes on NATO? Where's the party to conflict? I've talked about this before, and I'll just beat the same drum that I've been beating for the last year. The Russians use purposefully vague language to float the idea of a threat while never having to deliver on it. Party to the conflict. What does that even mean? Well, to somebody who is easily terrified, that could mean, oh my gosh, so they're going to bomb Germany, they're going to bomb Poland, they're going to bomb Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, we're all going to die, we're all going to die, we're all going to die. Somebody who's, maybe has anxiety problems might lean into that. Well, somebody else might lean into the idea of like, oh, that means that we're supporting one side of the conflict more. It's that vagueness that's supposed to leave people guessing and hopefully scare people from supporting Ukraine. But it's failed again and again and again and again and again and again and again. So many times. This also brings up the issue of nuclear escalation, that, well, if we give these weapons to Ukraine, it's going to escalate the war, which then could cause a nuclear incident, and then the world will end. And we've seen the Russians engage in rhetoric around nuclear weapons that I would say is irresponsible. But when we're talking about Russian government officials and not the junk you see on Russian state TV, nothing conclusive. For example, when they're trying to dissuade the West from sending more weapons to Ukraine with nuclear weapons, they'll say something along the lines of, we reserve the right to use our nuclear stockpile in defense of Russia's territorial integrity. Now, before this war, a statement like that probably wouldn't even get that much attention because it was a continuation of Russia's long-standing nuclear policy that they would use a nuke if Russia's territory was threatened, as in NATO troops crossing into Russia, gonna take St. Petersburg. But In this context, it's being used to try to scare away support because it's being used in order to say, well, we consider all of this annexed territory as part of Russia, so maybe in a weird way, we could include this in our nuclear policy. I mean, that's not how any other nation state has ever done nuclear policy. It invades a country, fails, and then falls back on its nuclear arsenal to try to save the day and do the international equivalent of acting as a suicide bomber on the grand scale to terrify the world into just allowing them to annex territory that they're failing to hold. But I think that it's most likely saber rattling because they've run out of other options. But one thing they can play upon is the fact that the United States and much of the Western world that is opposing them are constitutional republics. Because they're constitutional republics, the basis of their government support is based upon electoral politics. And so if they can scare enough of the public away from supporting Ukraine with these doomsday predictions or vaguely flirting with it, they might not be able to scare away the American State Department or the British foreign minister or any number of Western officials who understand that Russian nuclear policy hasn't really changed whatsoever since the start of the war from what we can see outwardly. But to the average voter, do they know that? Probably not. And so maybe if they try really hard and they boost it online on Facebook and Instagram and on Twitter, X, don't want to dead name them. Maybe they can convince enough of the public to drop support for Ukraine and drop support for more weapon shipments. It's failed 2022, it failed in 2023, and it failed again with ATACMS. And every time something like this fails, whether it was with the F-16s, whether it was with the Western tanks, or whether it was now with the ATACMS, every time this fails, that type of saber rattling, the effectiveness of it goes down and down and down. And the one thing I will say that's scary about this is that it'll be difficult for the public to know when Russia has come forward with an actual nuclear threat or when they're just chest beating because of how irresponsibly they're using the nuclear rhetoric. And that's going to be the difficult thing for the American public to respond to. When they hear someone say, time and time again, we reserve the right to use nuclear weapons. And then eventually, if they do say something like, if you invade Crimea, we will use nuclear weapons, which is not a vague threat, that's a direct threat. A threat that if they don't deliver on would make their nuclear threats even less credible and completely undermine their nuclear strategy. That's not a threat they have made, but who knows, maybe they will one day. After so many false threats and vague saber rattling, will the American public be able to tell the difference? It'll be up to American officials, defense officials, State Department officials to tell the difference and act on it and respond to it accordingly. But there is a downside to this type of rhetoric. They are whittling down the importance of the word nuke. That is bad. That is very bad. But putting all that aside and putting the concerns that led to people delaying and dripping, dripping this aid into the country, that has led to the Americans holding back on sending ATACMS for so long, which could have supported the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the south. That image of the saber that is being rattled is being smashed more and more every day once these red lines are crossed and shown to be nothing else. Like drawing a line in the sand on the beach. The waves are going to come, destroy it, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, whether the American government or Ukraine's Western backers has gotten the message, and they're going to treat Russian nuclear policy as it has always been since the creation of the modern Russian state, which is that its internationally recognized territory is not to be infringed upon by outside actors and invaded and conquered, which is very different than them invading and conquering their neighbors. Whether they have been awoken to that fact or not, we don't know for sure. But due to the fact that they keep sending these types of things that used to be called too escalatory to be able to send, I think that's a positive signal. I think that's a really positive signal. And it also shows how many different weapon systems that we were told was impossible. We can never do it. It'll never be sent. Then it was sent. That was true with the Western tanks. That was true with the Abrams. That was true with the F-16s. That was true with the Patriots. And now that's true with the ATACMS. What will it be true about next? On yesterday's stream, I went into detail about how Ukrainians have just received ATACMS from the United States. This is a big move. This shows that they're crossing another one of Russia's famous red lines, and the result has been basically no response from the Kremlin. I do want to put an asterisk here, though, because there's a few details that I feel like I didn't give enough information around, and some things that I didn't include that I think is important context. So the first thing, and this was talked about recently in the Telegraph by Lewis Page, is that what we sent over is not the ATACMS that Ukraine has been specifically asking for. The ATACMS that Ukraine has been specifically asking for has a range of 300 kilometers, not 165, which is the range of the kilometer, which is the range of the weapon that we gave them, the M36 block. This one only has a range of 165, not 300. And it also does not have the same destructive capacity. The ATACMS that the Ukrainians were asking for has a larger warhead that could penetrate deeper into buildings, penetrate concrete, and could maybe even be used to try to target the bridge connecting occupied Crimea to Russia proper. The type that we gave them is a cluster munition that could be used to attack say ammo depots, command and control centers, and vehicle storage locations. For example, like the helicopter, like the field of helicopters, the airfield that was targeted, and could destroy them with a large spread of cluster munitions. 27-year-old munitions we're sending over. So what we're sending is not they say the war-winning ATACMS. I think Lewis Page with that headline is being a little misleading, but they're not sending the ATACMS that Ukraine asked for. That doesn't mean this isn't useful. That doesn't mean that the Ukrainians aren't thankful for it. In fact, we have it right here that they are thankful for it. We have a message. One second. We've got a quote. Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said the United States will supply ATACMS long-range missiles to Ukraine on an ongoing basis. This is something I wanted to include also, is that it wasn't just like a one-time delivery. It seems that it's on an ongoing basis that we're going to be supplying these older, shorter-range ATACMS, which are actually referred to as, I believe it's anti-personnel, anti-material, which is APAM, a PAM, which is not as fun to say as ATACMS. We're sending these over an extended period of time. He also affirmed that he asked whether the first delivery of ATACMS meant the U.S. No, he affirmed that we would transmit them permanently and in greater numbers. He also said, if you read between the lines of President Zelensky's speech after the meeting with Biden, you can understand from him that a very important decision was made. Therefore, we thank the United States for fulfilling the agreements and strengthening our firepower. So he does acknowledge that this is helpful, but look at this. He also hopes that in the future, Ukraine will receive ATACMS missiles capable of hitting targets at the distance of 300 kilometers. So we did send ATACMS, but the ATACMS we sent were an older model. Why did we send this older model? Well, the reason why we sent this older model that has a shorter range is that it does, to a certain extent, fulfill the need that we believe that the Ukrainians have in trying to disable the supply lines that the Russians have in the southern counteroffensive, while also not straining American stockpiles. And the longer range ATACMS, which is currently integrated into American war planning, that we do not have a large supply of. I do still think, and I agree with Anthony Blinken on this, that we should have sent those longer range ones. I disagree with Mark Milley. I disagree with Lloyd Austin on not sending them. If we needed to replace them, we could produce and replace them if necessary. But since these older models are not ingrained into American war planning, we can afford to expend them. And that is agreed to by Jake Sullivan, that is agreed to by Anthony Blinken, and that is also agreed to by Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Mark Milley. So it seems that basically everyone agrees that this is something that we can expend, and so that is why we're sending it over. That is why we're sending this over. And so on one hand, we're not giving Ukraine exactly what it wanted, even though this does fulfill part of the want of why they wanted ATACMS, not all of it. And on the other hand, and I do think this is useful, when making an argument for sending these things over to Ukraine, it'll be very easy for us to say, these aren't even integrated into American war planning. What's the problem with sending it over? This is not straining our stockpiles because we don't even need these in our stockpiles. And I think that argument will be pretty convincing. Now, if somebody's against sending aid to Ukraine in the first place, whether that's going to move them or not, it probably won't. If they're against it on principle for isolationist reasons, but it will make a decent case as to why this isn't straining America's ability to defend itself if it was to be attacked. Ukraine needs it now. We might need it in a future possible scenario. And we don't even need it in a future possible scenario of an American invasion, which isn't going to happen. But you should always be prepared for, reasonably. That is the one certifiable job of the United States military. If we spend over $800 billion on our defense spending, the least they should be able to do is stop us from getting invaded.